Lars and I are going to have some fun today. We're going to make some 2024 way too early roster predictions.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over at Huskies Wire. Make sure you check out all of our written work in their respective locations. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. And remember, wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast, to subscribe and hit that bell notification thing so you never miss an episode as we put one out. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers if you join today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Lars, we've spent so much time doing all the, just keep it up to date because there's so much roster movement that's happened that will continue to happen. And we want to take a break from that for a little while. We're still going to talk about Justin Hylkema, the 3-star offensive lineman who did commit late on Monday night. So we're going to get to that. But first, we're going to have some way too early roster predictions, something that a couple of everydayers were out there asking for. So we're going to oblige and we're going to have some fun as the roster does start to shake out. So I don't know if we need to spend too much time on quarterback Will Rogers, where we talked about him for a while and we know what that's going to be. But we're going to definitely spend some time on the offensive line and on the running backs, which is where I wanted to start, because I think that we're going to see a really exciting two-headed monster of Cameron Davis and Jonah Coleman this year, which I think could end up being one of the better rushing attacks in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess since we're penciling it in right now, those are the two guys who you'd be rolling with. But if you add a potential running back that you mentioned, you could have three running backs that are elite and two that were graded out in the top 10 in PFF in the country. So just good. Actually, I believe even top 5. I'm not sure where.
Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt was top 5 in rushing touchdowns too.
And I was going to say, and so Coleman was near the top in rushing grade. So yeah, but my point of that is you're not necessarily worried about the quarterback and Jedd Fisch's offense, but where we saw Washington kind of take a step back under the previous regime, and not with Dylan Johnson, but was with the running back 2 and 3, right? And so I think when you look at the Michigan in the national championship game, what stood out? Donovan Edwards
and Blake Corum. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's not just Blake Corum, it's not just Donovan Edwards. You have to have multiple backs, which will help Will Rogers or whoever ends up being the quarterback. So yeah, I think the running back room for me is going to be a very key thing. But then that also kind of leads into probably where we need to go next, which is who's blocking and opening those lanes. Because Jonah Coleman can create his own holes to a degree. The other
Cam Davis
and
Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, yeah.
Exactly. And so those three could all kind of do similar things. I think Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is a little bit different than both Coleman and Davis. Yeah. But having all three of those guys will create way more opportunities for Will Rogers in the offense. And I think that's what, to me, the quarterback gets the sexy numbers, but I think the running backs are kind of what gets you the wins and what gets you to a championship.
So you're absolutely right, where, being able to carry the load like Dylan Johnson did, where we saw him, for example, in the Pac-12 championship game, in the USC game, where there were days where he was really asked to step up and play a huge role in the offense, and he did just that. He did a fantastic job of that. So that's going to be key. But then, as you said, who's going to be blocking for him? Where I think that the left side of the line is actually looking pretty solid right now. Where you look at Drew Party, who right now we would say probably is going to be the left tackle, and then Guard Memelar, who's probably going to play left guard, where that's who was slotted in for the majority of camp before his injury. And then outside of those two guys, where we think that that's going to be honestly fairly rock solid, the question is center, right guard, and right tackle, where we've talked about Landen Hatchett and his injury, and we'll see what his status is. UW football posted a nice video of him as part of the winter conditioning workouts this morning. So it seems like he's progressing really well in his rehab of his injury, but center and then a right guard and right tackle, where as of right now, I don't think that I'm going to say 2 of the 3 players for those positions are on the roster right now, where maybe we see somebody fill in where a redshirt freshman takes a big jump, whether it be like a Kaylee Tafai or an Elijah Jaquette, where one of those guys might take a big jump forward. But I think that they're going to hit the portal hard. I like I don't have his name off the top of my head. The SMU kid who plays a little bit of guard, a little bit of center. I wouldn't be surprised if Jedd Fisch goes after him really, really hard in the transfer portal. And, maybe you find a tackle and slot somebody at guard, like I said. But figuring that out is going to be the most important thing going forward.
No, I agree, and I think the interesting one, honestly, is center because Landen's your long-term center, right? And you're not going to bring somebody in like a redshirt freshman or a redshirt sophomore even to take those reps because you want Landen to be able to progress pretty quickly. So the other thing to consider here is, I'm sure I don't know if fans have asked about this, but Mateo Mele is, I think, done. I think
Mateo Mele is done with football. Yeah,
because Scott Huff had mentioned even before all this, he's like, yes, he could theoretically medical redshirt and do all this and that, but I think that would be your 7th year, and as an offensive lineman, it's like, okay, new staff, the same thing where that would be his fourth coach,
coaching staff,
right? Yeah. And so I think now just to have that quick conversation. So now that's out. So now, to your point, you do want to kind of get a grad transfer, maybe ideally in that situation, because you don't want Landen to get set back, but you also then don't want to kind of just lean on maybe a younger player just so Landen can come back, right? So I think the center, and we saw Parker Brailsford's impact this past season, and I think you're okay rolling with certain guys, but you want to just kind of get a veteran body in there so you don't have to worry about what that position is going to look like, because you can roll with Elijah Jaquette and a number of redshirt freshmen or sophomores at right guard and right tackle, because you want those positions going long term. But Landen, if you're not, because you want to have him as your long term guy, but you don't need to rush him back. You want to have a veteran up the middle, and so not having Mateo Mele as an option kind of almost enhances. Hey, let's just go get a kind of grad transfer. Just let him come in. Maybe he starts, maybe he doesn't. Maybe Landen comes back midway through the season, but also he can learn from whoever that grad transfer is, right? Because you don't want somebody that's going to be around next year. The only reason I say is because Landen should be your long-term center.
Right. No. That's a really great point. So tight end, we feel pretty confident that saying it's going to be Josh Cuevas, who we really like, think he could take a big step forward as a pass catcher this year and just become a lot more involved in the offense. So we also know that it feels like Giles Jackson and Denzel Boston, save for, maybe a transfer or two, which we might see at wide receiver. The biggest question remaining on this team is Jeremiah Hunter. We're going to roll with the fact that, right now it sounds like he's in the boat, and we'll talk about him as such, but that's going to be the biggest one, where if Jedd Fisch can continue to, just say, we're retaining guys like this and getting him in particular back on the roster, that's the other just biggest piece for Will Rogers right now, is having that wide receiver one to rely on.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the other thing too, is I think the other thing to consider with all of this is, again, it's going to be hard to replace Jamarcus Shepherd. So let's kind of be clear about that. All the discussions that we're going to have about the defense and the secondary, getting better coaching. Kevin Cummings is a fantastic coach. So there's no shade there. But I do think, maybe it's a step down-ish from where Jamarcus Shepherd had the room. But the reason why I say that is because Kevin Cummings is also going to coach up Denzel Boston and some of these younger guys, Rashid Williams, into bigger roles, not necessarily as an insult to Giles Jackson. I just think with the body type that he has, he's going to be kind of just a different, or like all around, hey, we're just going to use you in a number of different spots. And as a result, Rashid Williams, some of these other guys are going to be able to get more targets, along with, Jeremiah Hunter, Denzel Boston, things like that. So I think the wide receiver room, I'm not too concerned about, because if anything, you're almost looking at it like the cornerback room, where, okay, we got a couple of guys that are older just to make it safer, but we really want to bring up these young guys that we have that are going to be here for 2, 3, 4 years. No,
absolutely. And kind of with that, because that there's still so many positions that need to be filled out on both sides of the ball. I feel that there are more questions still defensively than they are on the offensive side. So let's jump on over to the defense. Right after we send a quick message to our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. There's going to be so much fun, with some of these bets. I kind of like the Niners in this game. I feel like it really is a toss-up that can go either way. But one thing that I was talking about with a friend of mine earlier this morning is, we kind of like the under. I think this is going to be a really hard-fought defensive game. So, if you want to check out FanDuel, take the under. That might be in your best interest. And FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, Lars, let's just go front to back with the defense here. And let's start up front, where we're still waiting on, a couple of announcements where we've heard good things, like we've said on the show about Isaiah Ward and Russell Davis, a couple of the Arizona transfers. But the edge room is fairly set, where you've got Zach Durfee and Voy Tanufi, who we'll kind of see. I'm very curious to see what kind of role Voy is going to play, where I think that he's going to have to play a lot more snaps, but is it going to be more as a pass rusher? Or do you bring in, let's just say, Russell Davis as more of an edge setting kind of guy where he's not, the heaviest player in the world, but is that something that you ask him to do? Or, maybe Maurice Himes steps into that role, Anthony James, Jacob Lane. There are a whole lot of options for that position. It's just a matter of filling it out. But when we look at defensive tackle, there are still needs where we think that there are two guys who can probably come into the room. We don't really have any names. We'll probably talk about more of that as spring ball rolls around. But the biggest question outside of Sebastian Valdez is what kind of role are we seeing from Jacob Bandes? And Armon Parker is the one that I'm really curious about, because we know Javon Parker has been really good and has found a lot of ways to contribute. But his twin brother Armon, who we heard more things about him coming out of high school than we did about Javon, has not played a game yet, and it feels like he's going to have to take a major step forward this season.
Yeah, but I will say, credit to the last staff, the way they handled his kind of injury and rehab and bringing him back, and the way they brought him back allowed him to, because truly didn't need him the past year and a half. Maybe from a depth perspective you could have, but I do think this kind of allows Armon to almost have that breakout season, almost similar to Zion in 2020, where, again, only limited sample size. But I do think with the increased reps that he's going to have, and Jason Kafusi coming over as the defensive line coach, I think that's kind of almost just where maybe you don't take one transfer that you would have, and you just turn Armon Parker loose. Because part of me thinks, at some point he's going to have to get turned loose, and so why would you bring in an extra body? Now, that's why you also maybe have Jacob Bandes as that upper-class veteran, is a whole safe option right here. Bandes,
yeah, like a good run stuffer, just somebody who's going to fill a role for you for the time being, where you don't need to rely on him for a whole bunch of snaps, but there is a role that he can fill, and you can focus on other needs. Yeah,
right. And then even if you do need him to play extra snaps, where if Armon doesn't end up kind of catching up where you want him to be, you have that veteran body versus, okay, now it's Armon or it's Jacob Lane, or it's Armon or it's Landen Davis, right?
Sure.
You're looking younger than you are looking safer and older. But I do think, for all that we talk about, hey, you want experienced bodies, at some point you got to play your young guys or your guys that haven't played, right? So, and knowing how good Armon was, the one that everybody wanted out of high school. So, the fact that Javon's actually performed better is only because he's been able to show that. So I think there's a reason why both coaching staffs, this under DeBoer and now under Fisch, are saying, hey, you know what, let's kind of just see what we got here before we start thinking, hey, we need to add 3 or 4 D-line bodies, right? Because you do need probably 1 or 2. But the question is, do you need 3 or 4? And that becomes, well, if Armon's able to go, then I don't think you really need to bring in 1 or 2 more. I think you just need to bring in maybe 1 as an extra kind of upper class security blanket, and then just kind of let the younger guys sort it out.
No, I agree with you there. And that's one of the nice things about, there are still a lot of holes we filled on this roster before spring ball. But even if the roster doesn't get up to 85 scholarships by the time that rolls around, it's just a benefit, because not only can we see more snaps from somebody like Armon Parker, but we can say the same thing at linebacker, where the starters seem to be entrenched, where it's Carson Bruner and it's Alfonso Tupatala. We'll see what Brian Parham can bring, the San Jose State transfer, who is really productive and looks like he's going to fill a nice role on this team. But then we look at some of the freshmen, some of these underclassmen, where it's, all right, what are we going to get from Devin Bryant? Where DeBoer's coaching staff was really high on him. We saw a lot of him early, not so much late as they tried their best to preserve his red shirt. And then Jordan Whitney, who we didn't see a whole lot of last year, but is super athletic, really fun to watch, just flies around the field. And I think he's somebody who can be a big contributor. And that's a big time position, right? Where I think that whenever we see one of those redshirt freshmen on the field, we're going to see the other. Where it's okay, this is something that we think we can rely on for years to come, like you just said, when it comes to Landen Hatchett at center, when it comes to some of these other positions where we feel that this is a position where we can rely on you two guys to carry the load. So we're still going to make sure we give Carson and Alfonso a lot of snaps. Same with Brian Parham. But when you two are out there, we're going to let you run the show, and we're going to see what we have in these two young guys.
Yeah, it's almost like what Carson was 2 years ago, where Carson was getting those snaps in a limited role, and we're like, wait, how is this guy? He's an insane hitter. How is he not playing more? It's like, well, because you got Eddie in front of him, and you got a couple other guys in front of him, and it's not. It wasn't a slight to Carson then, just like it's not a slight to Devin and Jordan now. But you want to have the room where it's kind of staggered progression, where hey, we're bringing in Parham not because we don't believe in Jordan Whitney and Evan Bryant, but because we'd rather have that, again, security blanket, have another veteran up there, a Raylan Goforth that you mentioned, right? Where have those veteran bodies up there to where, hey, if they don't play a ton of snaps, but you're winning, the older guys are okay with that. Do you think Raylan Goforth was upset that he didn't get as many snaps as he probably would have at USC this past season? No. Because he's playing at a national championship, won the Pac-12, beat USC, claimed that Washington had a better culture than USC, showed it on the field, and only lost one game as a Husky. So I think the kid made a good decision. And that's that point that you want to make about Parham, where it's okay, you got 1 year left, right? Just where do you want to get your wins at? And where can you go get your wins at? And so there's a lot of these guys where, and you see it in the NFL even, where, hey, wow, this guy's got only 10 to 15 snaps. Like, yeah, but that's a crucial 15 snaps, even if they're on special teams, right? Where it's like, hey, this is how you can make your money, A, getting in the NFL, and B, now getting in more snaps in college. Devin Bryant and Jordan Whitney should probably live on special teams next year because it's the same thing Carson Bruner did, right? Where Carson was great on kick coverage, great on punt coverage. And then the better you show yourself there, the more chances you're going to have to move up the linebacker depth chart.
No, that's absolutely right. And then you could say the same thing about some of these young defensive backs, where we talk about them all the time. Caleb Presley, Curly Reed, Leroy Bryant, where those are the guys we're really curious to see where they're going to move. I have a feeling that we might see one of them get into the rotation. Not all three. We're going to see all three take snaps for sure, but only one of them will find their way into the rotation because it's the same thing where it's going to be such a veteran group in front of them. Where right now, Ephesians Prysock is just locked in at one of the boundary corner spots. And then we'll see what happens with Decario Davis. That's why we're doing this now where things are still very fluid. Things can still change. Where we'll see what happens with Decario Davis. Well, and then, Devon Banks' injury. Looks like he's going to be ready to go for spring ball. We look at Elijah Jackson. We look at Thaddeus Dixon, where there's going to be a battle for two other corner spots right there. You could probably throw Jordan Shaw, who transferred from Indiana to Arizona to Washington, into that same mix where you can throw all those guys into the mix for those two roster spots. And then if you feel comfortable throwing Caleb Presley into that discussion or Leroy Bryant, because it feels like Curly Reed is going to be stuck on the boundary with just his size and length, and it's going to be way, way better suited there, where you look at that. And then you look at the same thing at safety, where it's probably going to be Cam Fabiculanen and Mikel Esteen, and then let's see what happens behind it. Where I like Raheem Wright. I wouldn't be surprised if he might play early. We'll see what happens. I've heard some good things recently about Peyton Waters, actually, from a couple of sources that, he might be leaning towards staying. We'll see what goes on with that one. But there's a whole lot there that's still moving, and that can still be fluid, where you can probably add one more safety. But it feels like, especially with what we've heard at the cornerback position, this is going to be a somewhat underrated group that can really surprise some people as the season rolls around.
Yeah, I mean, another one I would think of in that similar mode is Tristan Dunn. I must say Jordan Dunn. But yeah, Tristan Dunn. I don't know where Jordan came from, but Tristan Dunn's another one where it's almost like all the coaching staff the past couple of years, like, okay, who are the guys that are rising, right? Who are the guys that are potentially coming back? Vincent Holmes was another one up until he entered the portal, where I was like, man, if you could hold on to him, that'd be great. Maybe you still can. So there's again, to your point, we're pretty fluid at this situation, but I think the important thing that I want to hit on here is you got the right coaching, you got enough bodies to make it work, and now you just get to see who gets to separate under this new staff. And I think that's honestly kind of a good reason why a lot of the young guys are staying is, hey, there's no prior judgment if they want me to stay. Like, they're
Right.
giving me a shot. They're not just gonna say, "Hey, we need you to stay just so we can keep you as the fourth string DB and not give you a shot." It's like, well, no, they're gonna give me a shot. It's just up to me if I earn it.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing where it's really interesting to see how, because this roster, there's a lot of youth, there's a lot of talent, but it's also just very young and very inexperienced. Where you want to bring in, that's why you bring in somebody like Ephesians Prysock, where you don't necessarily have to right away say, all right, now we need Curly Reed to step up and that we have no other option. Where I know that's something you and I have talked about saying, it might not be the worst thing in the world to see what happens, but that's why we're not coaching. Where it's, they're going to throw people in front of you and say, all right, you can learn under this guy for a year, where Prysock probably going to be headed off to the NFL after the 2024 season, because he's somebody who's got the prototypical length, and you could see him easily as a day 2 pick with just his fluidity, his movement, his athleticism, his strength, where you can see all those things filling in really well. So why not, bring in somebody like that, where Curly Reed doesn't necessarily, you don't see, I was talking to our buddy Ben Glassmeyer about this the other day. You don't see a lot of body types like his. When Tacario Davis is the same thing, where if you're able to bring him along too, where you don't see a lot of body types like that, where if you can bring along somebody for Curly Reed, especially in that mold, to learn from and just learn how to just pick up on some of the things that he did really well, that it's just a much easier transition into 2025, where we might see that trio of young guys take over. And speaking of young guys, Lars, we did see another commit from offensive tackle Justin Hylkema, who I like his film a lot. I think that he's somebody who could be a major player on this offensive line in a couple of years. But before we get there, we're going to send a nice shout out to our good friends over at Jase Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we talk just for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. This is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if any of my friends or family, or one of their kids or one of their family members got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial infections, because this stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. So, Lars, Justin Hylkema becomes the 3rd member of Jedd Fisch's high school recruiting class to follow him to Washington. And we're probably going to see a couple more guys, Audric Harris and Rashawn Clark being the big outstanding names that have opted out of their NLI and have taken visits to Washington. So those are the guys who we expect might be able to follow soon. But when you look at Justin Hylkema's film, I really like it a lot. And he's somebody who has got prototypical tackle length, 6'8", 315 pounds, got that really great size, and he moves really well for his size. And I don't make this comparison lightly, but the way he finishes blocks reminds me a lot of what Roger Rosengarten did, where he doesn't move like Roger, where Roger was a top tier elite mover, where Hylkema for his size is very good at that. But the way he finishes blocks and the way he's just so violent through the end of both run and pass blocking reminds me of what Roger showed on his Valor Christian High School tape. And I think that that's something where, obviously he's going to need some time to develop under Brennan Carroll, but I think that he's somebody who could be a real contributor on this offense in a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the kind of the way you have to project offensive linemen is you have, like we said, Elijah Jacquet. There's a number of young bodies in that room. But if you think 2 years down the line, okay, now Jacquet's a junior, maybe even a redshirt sophomore, or even a senior, depending on how he plays, right? In terms of what his eligibility ends up being. So that's why you want to have Hylkema and guys like that in the fold, where okay, we can project you in a year or two from now, you'll be either in the rotation or potentially a starter. Like look at Parker Brosford. Parker Brosford showed you can play pretty early on as a freshman or redshirt freshman. Landen showed the same thing. So it's easy. It's not easy to play as a true freshman or redshirt freshman, right? But it's capable. But the point is, you can be in the rotation, and I think that's kind of what you're hitting on a little bit. Where getting a big body, like he's 6'8", right? Isn't
6'8", 315 pounds. Yeah,
right. Absolute unit, right? Absolute hoss. Yeah. So, and when you say he finishes blocks, like okay, like you can kind of work him in the scheme, and if he needs some technical ability, that's fine. You got a great offensive line coach to do that. but you can't coach that size. And I think that's something, and knowing Brendan Carroll, I have to imagine he will not put him at right guard. I love Scott Huff. Kind of put a rock in a hard place there, where when you have your right guard almost 6'7", almost 6'8" in his own right, Julius Buelo, it's like, hey, look, maybe you have a 6'5" guard and kick the 6'8" guy over to tackle, please. I mean, now again, to your point, you had Roger Rosengard, so it's kind of hard to say, hey, Buelo, you're gonna push Roger Rosengard, because that was never going to happen. That was never going to happen. But moving forward, you do want to have those bodies in the rotation. And I mean, almost reminds me, kind of the height reminds me a little bit of Caleb McGarry, right? Where, put him at right tackle, maybe a little more, I'm not stronger.
He moves a little more than Caleb did. Where Caleb is a very staunch pass protector. Yeah. And that's the thing where, like, when you watch his film, you see somebody who's running like a wing T offense, right? As a lot of high schoolers do. And a very smart friend of mine made a great point a long time ago. If you're pass blocking because pass blocking is the most important thing. That's the hardest thing for some of these kids to learn. If you're pass blocking really, really well, and you have that same prototypical size like that, you're Orlando Pace. And you just don't ever see that. And when you watch him, you say, okay, yeah, all the pieces of a very good pass blocker are there. And it's not a slight to a 16, 17-year-old kid to say, you're not as far along as a technically proficient pass blocker, because moving backwards with somebody in your chest that's pushing on you as hard as they can, while also, trying to keep solid technique and everything, that's very, very difficult for a lot of these guys to do. So coming along slowly as a pass protector is not an issue, where it's very easy to, get going forward and get downhill. A lot of run blocking stuff comes down to scheme more so than it does, actually using your body well, where it's the opposite for pass protection, where, scheme, hand fighting, all these things need to come along and need some development. But the actual just technicality of pass blocking and using your body the way that it needs to be is because he shields his quarterback very well, but it's just a matter of using your hands a little bit better, which is it's hard to learn and something that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I completely agree, but I will also say to your point about the way he finishes blocks, that gives me credence to think, okay, he should be a pretty good run blocker, right? Or at least if you're able to move guys right, if you're able to finish blocks like that, odds are you're pretty good at, starting that push as well, right? Because if you can finish it, it's like if you can start a fight, or if you can finish a fight, you probably can start a fight. If you can't finish a fight, maybe you can't start a fight. Maybe you might, get some punches in there, but you can't start or finish a fight. Justin Hylkema sounds like a kid who could start the fight and finish it once he gets to his full ceiling. And I think that's exactly the type of body that you want if you're Jedd Fisch and Arizona. Jedd Fisch in Washington. I almost pulled the.
That's why he took him at Arizona.
Oh, I was gonna. Well, it's also the Kalen words. I was like, I had a great, the spirit here at Washington or Alabama. Sorry, it's like we always have those brain farts. But yeah, it's the type of body, and we talked about this a lot with Scott Huff, right? It's a body type. Now we get to see what Brendan Carroll's body type is, and I'm not talking about him on the beach. I'm talking about what kind of offensive lineman does Brendan Carroll like to recruit, right? Because to your point, you could kind of just have that staunchy Caleb McGarry. We're all just going to be rigid in pass block, but maybe we struggle in run blocking, which is kind of what we saw with the Washington offensive line this past season. So now I think getting a guy who clearly knows the priority of a run game, not that Ryan Grubb didn't, love Ryan Grubb, but maybe a little more committed to the run, maybe a little more confident in his blocking offensive lineman to be able to open those holes. And so that when you kind of the reason why I'm kind of pairing all this together is we're getting towards the end of this, but when you start to look at the big picture of this, right, okay, now you have the offensive line scheme to your point, right? You're getting future offensive linemen that are going to develop into that scheme. So now as the program takes shape under Fisch, you're built for not just the short term, but the long term. We didn't see this under DeBoer. Now, we will say to a degree we saw the recruiting, right? Because you get a lot of Jedd and some of those guys.
Pocky Fee now being a big one, and I'll get to the
But even sticking with defense and not sticking with defense, going back to the defense, Caleb Presley, Leroy Ryan, all that, you get the young bodies in the room. So shout out to Courtney for doing that. But then you don't develop them and you don't touch them, and you just say, hey, watch the rest of your team go play for a national championship. You guys will never see the field.
Right.
Not because you don't have talent, but because some of us don't know how to develop talent. So, that is neither here nor there. But the point is getting the bodies in the room, now identifying what type Jedd Fisch likes. And I think you would have to agree, right? That you like the body
Yeah,
types Jedd Fisch is bringing
absolutely.
in. He's not bringing in guys that are just like, oh, okay, we're gonna buy low and hope we get the most out of them. It's like, no, we're gonna get mid range and develop high.
There was, and that's one of the reasons, like I said, where he took these guys at Arizona for a reason. Where, and this being a prime example of that. Now, just kind of as we wrap up here, this does leave just one name out there at the moment for Jedd Fisch and his staff to go re-recruit along the offensive line, because we've seen lots of comments from the everydayers, seen it all over, Twitter, wherever you look, that, oh, well, he needs to go out and get more guys along the offensive line. There aren't a lot out there right now that fit what he's looking for, where Pocky Finau being the one. Oh, you have something? Go ahead.
Well, because Branson Hickman, I believe, is the offensive lineman from SMU that you're referring to earlier.
Yes, that is him. But I don't think he's officially entering his name in the portal until the spring, because he missed the window. Where it says, I remember seeing a report that said he was going to enter the portal but missed the window, so he's going to do it in the spring. So that's that, and that's where we'll see how that one plays out.
And knowing this day and age of college football, and whether you like it or not, I wonder if it's almost like, hey, I'm going to decline my player option, right? Think of it in baseball, right? I'm going to decline my player option. I'm going to now be a free agent when free agency opens up. My agent will be figuring out where I'm going. So right when 11, like it's like the NFL free agency, where right when all the window actually opens up. I mean, we've seen in the NBA, but where deals are happening 2 weeks before the window even opens. Like, hey, when we have free agency, I'm signing here. It's like, wait, how did you? No, don't ask this question. You don't want to know these answers. So I'm just telling you, like, and that's why I mentioned this name, right? Because now the guys are entering the portal. My assumption is, I would imagine there's some back channel communication going on with multiple schools, not just Washington, but with multiple schools, right? So that's kind of to your point. Yes, because you see him, he's in the portal right now, but I would imagine maybe he can be in the portal but can't come out, or.
So he's just not, he hasn't entered officially yet, is the report I remember saying. But Lars, on that note, I feel like that's a good point for us to wrap up for today. Just a quick a quick scheduling note for everybody. As you're for all the everydayers out there, as you're listening to this on Wednesday, I will be in New York. I've got a couple of things going on. So Lars and we're going to try to get back to you with maybe a live show on Thursday afternoon. Worst case, we will talk to you again on Friday. We want to make sure we keep you updated, because there's going to be just a whole lot more roster movement just from some of the rumors we're hearing, everything that's going on. So, if you want to stay up to date on all of that, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And be sure to like the video. Leave us a comment down below. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review. It all does really help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.